I'm Beth Pariseau, Senior News Writer at TechTarget, and this is IT Ops Query Season 2, The State of SecOps. Melinda Marks is Cybersecurity Practice Director for TechTarget's Enterprise Strategy Group analyst firm. Previously, she held a variety of roles in the IT and cybersecurity industry, including marketing and PR leadership positions at vendors such as VMware, Qualys, and Tenable Network Security. Just before joining ESG in 2021, she was Chief Strategy Officer and CMO at Soluble, makers of a CI/CD security and compliance automation tool for infrastructure as code. Thanks for being with us, Melinda.
Thanks for having me, Beth.
So I wanted to talk with you about Microsoft's Secure Future Initiative report that began last year after a pretty scathing report on them, and they issued their first report on their progress last week. So what was your overall impression of that report, and was there anything in it that surprised you?
Yeah, my overall impression is just finally, they really have to do this. And I think a lot of it wasn't surprising, but to me, the key takeaway is they really have to work on and prioritize security and put that pen to paper on that plan. And they've done a good job. But to think of it in the bigger picture, they have 1.5 billion users. Microsoft's 365 has over 300 million paid subscribers. So that's just such a huge reach. You've got tens of millions of developers too. In my world of cloud and application security, they're using things like Visual Studio. There's the GitHub users. So there's like 100 million developers using GitHub to build and collaborate on applications. So you've got also the millions of users on Azure. And when you have that many users and you're that big, you're going to be a target. And so it's one of those, like, finally, they got this plan on paper. All of their competitors, every other big legacy vendor has been talking about the security as a priority. And now they're saying, now security is a priority. Here are all the things we're doing. And some of the things in there that they were talking about was like, wow, you just did that. When you have such a huge organization, you're going to have pockets of things. We talk about in security, the adage of you can't secure what you can't see. Well, when you're that big and you have that many users, there's going to be shadow tech. And so those are going to be the things that the hackers are going to target. They're going to target anything that's been neglected. So they're talking about how many inactive tenants they booted, things like that. That's part of the rigor of what you need for security. And I think every security professional should read this report. It's good to see what they're doing. It's also good to think of it as kind of a blueprint for how you need to think of security and how important it is. Being in the cybersecurity industry for as long as I have been, and knowing how important just those Microsoft vulnerabilities and patching is. I got my start at Qualys, which is vulnerability management, and those Patch Tuesdays are the bread and butter of making sure that your security is running smoothly, is just making sure that all your Microsoft applications are patched. So they've had to do this. They've been in the news a lot. They've had software vulnerability attacks. They've had software supply chain attacks. They've had ransomware. They've had all kinds of issues. So they really needed to do this.
It's interesting to me that you bring up Microsoft's scale. I actually spoke to our security news director, Rob Wright, on his podcast last week about this. And I was saying that I don't think that any sufficiently large enterprise can necessarily say, especially with such precision, that 99% of all our assets is covered by this centralized programmatic security policy. Mm-hmm. And a company the size of Microsoft, to your point about they have 1 billion users, they talked about 500,000 work product updates per day. Mm-hmm. So when you first hear, okay, 440,000 assets still being managed with a out-of-date, obsolete, insecure API in Azure, mm-hmm. It sounds like a mind-blowing number. But at Microsoft's scale, it's at least a minority. So I did wonder whether you think they're behind most enterprises or if they're kind of in the same boat where there's lots of the company that is doing the most advanced cybersecurity practices But can you say that about 100% of your legacy too?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think it's hard to give that percentage with certainty. It's very hard to know, and that's part of the challenges. And this is something that being in the cybersecurity industry, visibility is always number one, but you can never have that complete visibility, especially when you're so dynamic and innovative and growing. So it's interesting that they would try to quantify that. Everybody tries to get there, but it's definitely challenging. And I think they're behind in emphasizing that security is a priority. We've seen a lot of messaging from the other companies in this space, especially again, for me with cloud security. If you think of Google and AWS, Google is, of course, a newer company,
Right.
and they are more in the cloud. Doing updates is easier in a lot of ways than being an older legacy company like Microsoft, same with AWS. But if you go to any of their conferences or shows, they're always talking about security as priority number one. And Microsoft, they do security, but it's only because they've been in the news and they've had this pressure on them of you have to do this. As an analyst firm, we work with their competitors to give them advice on what they can be doing better. And one of those things is make security the priority, because everybody knows if you're innovative and you're adopting new technologies, if there is some security issue, then you're going to have to go backwards. You can't keep progressing. You're going to have to pull back. And we've seen this in our research where there's things like faster release cycles, more adoption of newer technologies. But if there's a security incident, all of a sudden they put the brakes on. And this is something we always talk to our security teams about, is make sure that you are loud and vocal, even though there may be other groups that are trying to move fast, trying to progress development, trying to increase productivity. Security needs to be loud about, let me help you make sure you're doing that securely. Don't go around our team. And that's where Microsoft, they have to do it, and then they have to do it well. So they're just going to have to be very vocal and be aggressive so that they don't lose customers over this, because it's hard for people to stop using their Microsoft tools. But if they do have these big security disadvantages, then maybe people would think about moving to Google for their email and their productivity suites. And so that's a big threat to Microsoft. So they really have to stay on top of this.
Yeah. With Rob, I compared it to a person that knows that they need to be better about diet and exercise, but it's not till they have a heart attack that they have to go and really make it a priority.
And they have done some really good things. Like they have done a lot of work with their Microsoft Security Response Center, and Ann Johnson is there, and she's awesome. She's done a lot of programs. She's the corporate VP of Security, Compliance, and Biz Dev. And because they're so big and they have so many customers, of course, Microsoft is the first person they call when there's a breach, and then they have to help the customers through that. So they do get a lot of data from that. And the other way that I've seen them as being ahead of the curve is with their security solutions for cloud. They were ahead of the other cloud providers in providing multi-cloud support. So they have Microsoft Defender. So I give Microsoft a lot of credit for that too. It's just they have to be more vocal about security as a priority for every product that they have.
The Cyber Safety Review Board is only 3 years old. It was established by President Biden's executive order in 2021. Do you think that and the fallout that has ensued for Microsoft, also the action that has prompted in terms of software supply chain security, reflects a changing general attitude about cybersecurity in the industry?
Yes, definitely. Just because we know that every type of company across every industry focuses on software now, or building applications. So you pay your electrical bill online, you get notifications, the systems are run through technology that can be hacked. And so there is this better understanding now. Security has always been like this, where sometimes it's under the radar, because if it's working well, you don't pay attention to it. You're talking about like healthcare. If you're healthy, you don't pay attention to your health. You only pay attention when you're diagnosed with something. It's the same way with security. You don't get budget for it if things are running smoothly. You get budget for it if some company is in the news for an attack. We see this a lot with our research too. We see a lot of incidents happening, and whatever caused those incidents, that's where all of a sudden they have money to spend, whereas they couldn't get that budget before. So it's good to have an administration that's very forward thinking and proactive about this stuff. Ideally, if you're doing good risk mitigation, fewer incidents happen. And then when the incidents happen, you can put more efforts into it and just do a really good job. We ask a lot of these questions in the software supply chain because there's SBOM and other regulations that come out of it. And it's kind of like, sometimes the politicians may not understand all of the technicalities and the nuances of what kinds of pressures they're going to put on companies, or how they understand where they should put liabilities. And that makes it complicated. But the attention and awareness is definitely good. In the industry, you want to do things to do them right, but with there's regulations and compliance and possible fines, it sometimes is a driver to get those things right and then have a good program that meets all of your objectives. So you're not doing any fire drills. So kind of the old way would be you have compliance regulations and some things do, and you kind of scramble to make sure you're doing everything right. But instead, if you're strategic about your security program, you can kind of hit multiple birds with fewer stones with just really good programs and say, oh, this regulation came out, but I already know I'm doing these things. So that's kind of what we aim for.
Do you see other enterprises struggling with legacy applications the way Microsoft discusses in that report? And what's your recommendation for dealing with that technical debt?
Yeah, it's both assessing what you currently have and making sure you have a good understanding. Again, this is what's so important about security teams communicating with other departments and other leaders of other groups. You want to make sure that they trust you to do the right things and not do things like slow them down. Again, everything is about visibility. And if other groups think they need to go around you, that's the danger that we want to avoid. Technical debt, it amasses. It is like that stone rolling down the hill that just keeps getting bigger. What I like to say is that security teams really need visibility and control. So it's a matter of making sure they understand inventories, make sure they can monitor what's going on, but then they also have control to help set policies. And ideally, again, if you're partnered with those other organizations, to do all of that in an efficient way, because the success of a security program really depends on that efficiency. That's where vendors like Microsoft have a lot to do with the success. Like with Azure, there's a lot of telemetry data that can be pulled into other tools. The security is built into products and software and ways for developers to work. That, to me, is what's really crucial for program success, making sure that security is top of mind for everything, really. Of course, I'm biased because I'm in cybersecurity, but the more everybody thinks about it, it's not just a security team's job.
And to the point about collaborating with other teams, I personally hear a lot about security collaborating with app teams and with DevOps teams. But some other guests of mine this season on my podcast have talked about a disconnect between SecOps and the rest of IT ops. The IT ops organization that's responsible for the resiliency of the infrastructure. And then that disconnect, for some people, that was highlighted by the CrowdStrike outage, which was not a security breach, but obviously came about as the result of a security product. Do you see that disconnect among enterprises? Do you think that that's a valid concern?
Absolutely. SecOps should look a lot different for more modern or cloud native organizations. So security operations is usually pretty siloed from other groups like, say, application security teams. We did a research study last year on cloud detection and response, and one of the cool findings in it was that security operations recognize that if security is better integrated in DevOps, then that makes their job easier. But the problem is a lot of those SecOps tools and the teams are completely separate. So again, tying things together throughout the whole software development lifecycle, and this is something kind of funny in my coverage areas. I cover cloud and AppSec, but sometimes it's like, well, cloud security is AppSec for organizations because everything that you do now is focused on applications because you're putting everything in the cloud. It's all related. or there's like application security platforms or application security posture management tools. And then there's CSPM, cloud security posture management tools. This is the stuff that makes me crazy, is the shift left, shift right. And to me, it's one software development lifecycle and building efficiency throughout. The better you have visibility into what's running in production and runtime, the better your application security and development security can be, because you understand how the applications should run. And that cycle, it's just very difficult if you're a traditional application security person or traditional InfoSec person. It's hard for teams to adjust to that. What I see a lot of times is that organizations who are doing a better job adapting to more workloads being in the cloud and supporting more cloud native development, sometimes they have to tap their former developers or DevOps people to get involved in security. And instead, it's kind of like, no, we just need to train security teams to better understand this stuff and figure out ways to pick the right tools and gain the trust of the other groups. I always see you at the developer conferences or the KubeCons, and I'm always asking the people there who are sitting in the security sessions, what is your job? What is your role? And then, are you working with the security team? A lot of times, unfortunately, more than I notice at other conferences, they're saying, no, I absolutely don't want to work with the security team because they're just going to slow things down. I'd rather just do it myself. I want to see less of that.
Bigger picture, in my little world, I've been hearing about these things, collaboration, DevSecOps, bringing everybody to the table for years. Has the needle moved at all? I mean, has there been progress over the years, or are most people still struggling with these things?
Yeah, I think there has. And I've definitely seen the evolution over the years too, because I do see more developers. Like in our research, we always track the sentiment of how willing are the developers to work with security. And it falls lower on the list of what are your challenges. For adopting DevSecOps, it's more about efficiency and having the right tools. The vendors have a better understanding of it now too. What screws things up, and this is like I rant about it a lot, are just those categories of tools, because people are thinking of the tools in terms of the categories, whereas I think people just need the mindset of solving their actual problems that they have in the most efficient way. But I think there's definitely progress. And I've also seen a lot more of tying in the CNAPP categories, the cloud native application protection platform, into more of the detection and response and SecOps and cloud detection and response capabilities. And then they also do some tying back into application development or the AppSec tools, because you can respond a lot faster if that stuff is all tied together, because you know who the developer is from the very beginning who could fix something when it's in runtime. So that's starting to happen more. And then I also see a lot of messaging and tools to help the SecOps teams work with other teams. So I'm optimistic about that. I just think people kind of have to stop with the category stuff. A platform should be something that ties information together so that you have fewer alerts across teams. You have a single record of what's going on. You have a single source of truth for visibility, and then you get more context to know what to fix when and how it does that and what elements it includes. I mean, that's the complexity that cloud native has, because there's certain elements that are going to scale quickly where they might need some extra attention. So things like APIs, open source software, software supply chain stuff. The Gen AI stuff is going to need a lot of expertise too for security teams to get their arms around. But this idea of understanding that it has to span the software development lifecycle and drive better collaboration across siloed teams, I think that's something that is evolving.
What do you think will be the biggest factor in improving the state of SecOps? Will it be AI? Will it be regulatory pressures like we've seen with Microsoft?
I think both, really. Microsoft is applying AI for their SecOps, and then also Google is innovating really well there. Some of their Chronicle capabilities with AI is going to help in a lot of ways, but I think it's just going to be hand in hand, and the community and being vocal about this is going to help because we're the ones who have the understanding of these things versus the folks in the administration or legislators or people in Congress who are trying to make a name for themselves, knowing that AI is coming and they need to be the ones to have some legislation. There was a lot of talk around the bill in California that I think Scott Wiener was behind, and it had to go through multiple revisions before that got passed or got support. And there's still a lot of senators who actually are pretty technically savvy who were talking about how you don't want to put the liability on the developers, you want to put the liability on the hackers who would attack these LLMs. So it's just stuff like that where we as a community have to keep people educated about what's going on and then help shape that. And it's nice to see certain InfoSec prominent folks who are very vocal and trying to make sure that their voices are heard, or they're going and testifying in Congress and participating in other ways to make sure that that's done properly. So I think just trying to understand the risks and what security teams need to do and make sure that those regulations don't put undue pressure or undue stress on them without addressing what they really need to address will be key.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today, Melinda. It's great to get your insights.
Yep, always great to talk to you. Thanks.
This has been IT Ops Query Season 2, The State of SecOps. If you have any feedback on this episode or want to share questions, comments, or stories we should consider covering, please reach out to me at B as in boy, P as in Peter, A-R, I, S as in Samuel, E-A-U at TechTarget.com. Please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast on your platform of choice. And tune in next week for our continued conversations with industry experts about the challenges facing security operations. Thank you for being with us so far.